Tonight, tributes to the former British and Commonwealth boxing champion Willie Limond, who's died aged 45. He was due to fight next month and has been described as a legend in the sport.
He's just one of boxing's gems, you know, a real good guy, and it's just a devastating and such a sad loss to Scottish boxing.
Also making the headlines, Jewish families in Scotland describe a night of fear for their relatives in Israel following a drone and missile attack by Iran.
Families campaign against the closure of specialist dementia units they say provide lifeline services for loved ones.
And in sport, Philippe Clement has branded Rangers' performance as the worst since he took charge. The defeat leaves them trailing Celtic by 4 points in the title race. I'm Kellyanne Woodland in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6. Good evening. The former British and Commonwealth boxing champion Willie Limond has been described as a legend of the sport following his death at the age of 45. Others paying tribute today say the Glasgow-born fighter was a true warrior and an infectious character who will be greatly missed.
Limond, who won 42 of his 48 professional fights, died in hospital more than a week after falling ill amid preparations for his next match. Our chief reporter, Sharon Frew, has been looking back on his life and career.
It was this famous bout with Amir Khan that thrust Willie Limond onto one of boxing's biggest stages. Even in defeat in 2007, the Glasgow fighter's ability and spirit shone through, inspiring future champions.
One of my idols is growing up as coming through the sport. For me personally, he's one of Scotland's greatest fighters. You know, it's just like in terms of the talent that he had, the fighters that he took on outside the boxing ring. He was a great guy as well, and I just think that he'll go down and be remembered as one of Scotland's true warriors.
Willie Limond had been preparing for another comeback clash next month when he was found unresponsive in his car. It's believed he had a suspected seizure. His son Jake posted on social media that the 45-year-old had died in hospital this morning after a 10-day fight. He described his father as a warrior. Willie, who grew up in Glasgow's East End, took up boxing at the age of 6 and made his professional debut in 1999. He came out of retirement to face former world champion Ricky Burns last September.
The world has lost one of the good guys. The city of Glasgow has lost one of its great sons. When he fought Ricky Burns, I remember saying to him, "Why you come back into the ring?" And he said, life's boring without the boxing. And that's the way Willie was.
Limond claimed many titles, winning 42 of his 48 professional fights. Many felt this night, almost 17 years ago, should have been life-changing when he knocked the future world champion Amir Khan to the canvas.
It's gone down in boxing history as the night of the long count. Now, Khan went on to be one of British boxing's superstars, but Willie had him down early in the fight. And all I'll say is that the referee took an extraordinary length of time to count to 8. On that night, I thought Willie was robbed.
Trainer Billy Nelson knew Willie for over 3 decades.
Even in the gym now, as you can sense, it's a very sombre mood in here. We've lost a Scottish boxing legend. Out with boxing, Willie was a character. He was when he was in the room lit up. Great memories, well, just sorely missed.
Those who shared a ring with Limond are also paying tribute tonight, among them former world champion Anthony Crawler, who described the boxer as one of the best men he had ever met. Sharon Frew, STV News.
Well, remembering Willie Limond, who's died aged 45. Well, on to other news tonight, and parties at Westminster have called for restraint in the Middle East following the drone and missile attack on Israel by Iran at the weekend, with RAF jets joining the defensive effort.
Meanwhile, members of the Jewish community in Scotland have described a night of fear for their relatives in Israel. Our Westminster correspondent, Paris Goutsianis, joins us. And Paris, there was consensus across the parties in condemning Iran.
There was, John, but up to a point, because while there's common ground on condemning Iran, there's much less consensus on the conflict that's really fueling instability in the Middle East, and that's the war in Gaza. Let's take a moment, though, to put this into context, because what happened at the weekend was truly unprecedented. Iran has never directly attacked Israel before, but felt it had to respond to a strike on one of its consulates. Likewise, the UK has never directly engaged with Iranian military targets, but RAF Typhoons flying out of Cyprus shot down a handful of unmanned drones. Now, those RAF jets are part of an ongoing mission against the Islamist extremists ISIS, so there aren't any serious calls for a fresh Commons vote at this stage. What there was a serious and somber mood among MPs earlier.
Although the Middle East is thousands of miles away, it has a direct effect on our security and prosperity at home. So we are working urgently with our allies to de-escalate the situation.
In repelling the attack, Israel showed strength and courage. It must now show the same strength and courage to de-escalate.
These acts are no more than a cynical attempt to exploit the suffering, the pain and the turmoil being experienced by those people in Palestine right now. And whilst we rightly condemn the violent acts of Iran, so too must we condemn the violent acts of Israel.
For members of the Jewish community in Scotland who have relatives in Israel, this was a frightening reminder of the ability of this conflict to potentially spiral out of control. STV News spoke to some of them.
My parents spent the evening, and they're elderly, they spent the evening in their safe room, which every modern building in Israel has, and they had a list of what they had to take with them, which was it was quite frightening when it becomes real in a westernised country and you hear it. They have to take in a bucket and they have to take in food and they have to be prepared.
Family very stressed and distressed, really wondering with that barrage of rockets, if any would land, where it might do damage, people's having to run to shelters, or people in areas where the sirens didn't go off but they could hear and see the planes going over.
People that live in Israel unfortunately are used to living with that fear of attacks and rockets, but this was the unknown attack and the unknown kind of fear of what was coming.
And Paris, you mentioned the conflict in Gaza. What impact will this have on efforts to reach a ceasefire?
Well, the fear is that by opening up a new front in this conflict, Gaza will remain an untreated open wound. Aid agencies say it's at risk of becoming the world's worst famine. But one thing you didn't hear from the SNP or Labour in the Commons earlier were repeated calls to block arms sales to Israel, because politically it's tough to apply pressure while also rushing to someone's defence.
Paris at Westminster, thank you. The General Secretary of the Scottish Trades Union Congress is warning that strikes in Scotland's council seem inevitable this year. Council workers have walked out over pay for the last 2 years.
Speaking as trade unionists gather in Dundee, Ros Foyer says that local government services are in crisis. Well, our political editor Colin Mackay is there for us. So Colin, what was she saying?
Well, this is the STUC, where it's the umbrella group for all the unions in Scotland. If you cast your mind back 12 months at this Congress, we were facing widespread industrial action. They managed to avert it throughout the NHS, but there were a lot of strikes from the teachers and from council workers. They closed schools right across the country. Ros Foyer told me today there have been 450 strikes in Scotland in the last year, and most of them were about pay to try and match inflation or the cost of living crisis, and she said that the unions have managed to deliver about £4.4 billion worth of pay increases to workers in Scotland over the last 2 years. But there are still some long-running industrial disputes going on. The college lecturers will be out again tomorrow, but Ros Foyer's warning there could still be more to come.
Well, I think there's potential right across the public sector, but in particular, I think there is a crisis of funding in local government, and many people rely on those services. They are on their knees.
For the last 2 years, do you think there's going to be more coming?
I do, yes. If we don't resolve the problems in local government funding, I can't see how that can be avoided. We also have a huge issue of equal pay that we've really only seen the tip of the iceberg on, and we can already see, just last week I was on a picket line with workers across a number of local authorities taking action on equal pay.
And Colin, the STUC is hearing from political leaders. Today was Scottish Labour's Anna Sarwar. What did he have to say?
Well, inevitably, a lot of his attention was on foreign affairs. He's calling for an immediate end from the UK arms sales to Israel. That's a slightly different line from what you were just hearing. Sir Keir Starmer's line is at Westminster, but on the domestic front, he told the STUC that a future Labour government would be on the side of the workers.
We have a chance this year to deliver change, to deliver a new deal for working people that makes work pay, that delivers a real living wage, that ends the exploitative use of zero-hour contracts, ends the scandal of fire rehire, the most transformative transfer of power and wealth into the hands of working people. We only get that, though, if we get rid of this rotten Tory government and elect a Labour government across the UK.
But a couple of months ago, when you had your own party conference in Glasgow, you were talking to the bosses.
No, we were talking to the trade union movement who were there in their droves.
Bosses, you had your own special conference for the bosses at your conference.
Look, we are the Labour Party, the political wing of the Labour movement, and we are going to deliver that new deal for working people that is the most transformative change for working people in any generation.
And tomorrow, First Minister Humza Yousaf will be here at the STUC in Dundee. He'll have to defend his record on things like the Scottish Child Payment, but I'd also expect him to turn his general election attack firmly on Labour.
All right, Colin, more from you tomorrow. A group of relatives who lost loved ones in controversial or violent circumstances have joined forces to call for changes in the way Scotland's legal system deals with sudden deaths. The newly formed Families United want to see a radical overhaul as they believe what is currently in place is shambolic and lacks transparency and accountability.
Relatives are calling for reforms, including coroner's inquests, which are used in England and Wales and which give families more involvement. Lewis Mickey reports.
When Colin Marr from Fife died from a knife wound to the chest in 2007 after a row with his fiancée, police ruled it was a suicide. His family have always pressed for answers on that ruling, answers they feel are hard to come by in the current system. They've now joined 5 other families who lost loved ones in similar circumstances to campaign for change.
We started laying out what went wrong, why did it go wrong, and we looked at the whole procedure, right through from complaints and everything like that. If you could correct the failing at the earliest stage, you could make amends and the families wouldn't have to go through these years. And instead what we have is no facility to do that. And in turn, therefore, we have to live with this because there seems to be a double down on the failing.
Campaigners would like to see the introduction of coroner's inquests to Scotland, such as those used in England and Wales.
What we're trying to achieve is to make sure that nobody has to go through what we went through. This, what we're fighting for, cannot influence our positions. We can give every single family the chance to at least be heard when they lose someone suddenly, to the details and be asking questions and supported through that process.
The calls received backing from the charity Faces and Voices of Recovery.
Well, it's an independent process, it's an independent eye on the data, on the analysis, so in other countries across the world where that happens, it's a more thorough investigation, and of course it's not the Crown Office marking its own daughters, essentially.
A Crown Office statement says it understands the impact the loss of a loved one has on bereaved families. The Crown insists every death reported to it is investigated thoroughly and independently. Stuart believes there are many lessons to learn with almost any sudden death, but at the moment he feels systems in Scotland aren't optimised to allow us to learn those lessons, and he hopes this can be the way to change that. Lewis Mickey, STV News.
Disabled people say it's vital they're given a say in how the new National Social Care Service will work because of the impact the right support can have on their lives.
Extra funding has been announced for services across Scotland which help ensure individuals get care which is best suited to them in order to live independently. Here's our senior reporter, Gordon Cree.
When the Minister for Social Care visited the Lothian Centre for Inclusive Living this morning, she met Kieran and Ashley, who've been using the service for years. Both women have personal support packages which allow them the help they need to work and live independently. They told me why services like this make such a difference.
You know, with people at your level rather than going to your PA or, you know, your family or professional to work out the solution, because people with lived experience get it.
I mean, access to getting support is crucial. It is complicated. The whole minefield of social workers and knowing the right questions to ask, knowing the right words to say to get the right kind of support that you need. And how do you know that if you don't know?
Now an extra £9 million is being allocated to self-directed support, which gives disabled people more choice and control over their own care. That will continue to play a key role as the National Care Service is planned and introduced.
They have a right to live fulfilling, independent lives. I want it to be simpler and easier to navigate the system. I meet too many people who are just bewildered and don't know where to turn for support. I want that all to be simpler and clearer. And I want people to feel supported earlier. I want us to get that help in before people reach crisis.
Disabled people have been disproportionately affected by the isolation of the pandemic period and the cost of living crisis. Groups working in the sector have said they've often felt like they're not a priority. The success of decisions made in the coming years will be measured in part by what extent that feeling changes. Gordon Cree, STV News, Edinburgh.
Other stories in the West, and Professor Sir Anton Muskatelli, the principal of Glasgow University, is to retire next year after 16 years in the role. He will continue in the role until a successor is in place. One of the UK's largest care home providers is closing 3 of its specialist dementia units in Lanarkshire. HC1's units in Bells Hill are the only sites in the area which look after residents with advanced dementia needs. Families fear their loved ones could end up back in a locked hospital ward. Caitlin Hutchison reports.
Jan was moved from nursing home to nursing home before ending up at Monklands Hospital on a psychiatric ward for people with advanced dementia needs. It was a huge relief when she finally got a place at a specialist care home unit close to her daughter in Bells Hill. But that's about to change.
They told us it would be our forever home that she would be in. And then all of a sudden, we don't know where they're going to go.
Dozens of people like Anne were shocked to find out the care provider intends to close the 3 specialist dementia units that provide lifeline services to their loved ones. And they're now campaigning for answers.
I just think that HC1 have really pulled the rug under our feet. They haven't really gave us any time. The families are sort of still in shock.
Evelyn's husband, Sandy, was also moved to Hattonley last year after 5 months in hospital. She'd thought that was where he would see his dementia journey through.
We've got 2 daughters, 2 adult daughters, and when we took him to the unit the first time, they left in tears and said, my dad doesn't deserve to be left here. After all his hard work, he's a really clever man that's worked hard all his days. The units were shabby and it did break our heart to have a look at it and leave him there. However, now he's out of the hospital environment, I would never allow him to go back to it, never.
Hattonley's specialist dementia units in Bells Hill provide care to 40 residents, some of whom have been there for more than a decade. The majority of residents in communities like these have spent time in mainstream care homes but had to move on when staff became unable to cope with their behaviours and needs. The specialist units are the only ones in the area, and now that they're closing, there's concern about where these vulnerable adults might end up. A letter from care provider HC1 states the units are no longer fit for purpose and claims it's in the best interests of residents to be supported in other care settings. Health and Social Care North Lanarkshire has made clear that it wanted the contract with HC1 to continue, but says work to identify a replacement service is now well underway. The families involved are determined to secure not only adequate care for their relatives, but somewhere their loved ones can call home. Caitlin Hutchison, STV News, Lanarkshire.
Time for the sport, and Roland's here.
Cheers, John. Good evening to you all. Philippe Clement says he expects a reaction from his players against Dundee on Wednesday after Rangers lost 3-2 to Ross County yesterday. The result is a blow to the Ibrox club's title hopes. They now trail Celtic by 4 points. Clement branded his team's performance as their worst since he took charge. Rangers have now dropped 8 points in their last 4 Premiership games. The emotions of the two sets of players at full time couldn't have been more contrasting after Rangers' shock defeat to Ross County. Philippe Clement accepts the performance of his team was way below the level he expects.
We throw away the points today. That we didn't start well enough first half, on the ball, in the duels. We get our chances also. We were not lethal enough also in the opportunities that we got in the first half. I didn't see a performance in these 6 months like we had today. So we need to take the good lessons out of that and react, because they showed enough times that they can do much better than they did today.
After the hosts missed a couple of good early opportunities, Rangers took the lead in the 15th minute, courtesy of an own goal from Jack Baldwin. Then in the second half, Philippe Clement's side collapsed. 2 minutes in, and at the second attempt, Simon Murray levelled for Ross County. In the 50th minute, County took the lead. Jan Danda was afforded space in midfield. He picked out Murray. The forward shot was saved by Jack Butland. George Harman was quickest to react. Midway through the second half, it went from bad to worse for the visitors, and once again their defence was found wanting. Eli King set up Josh Sims, 3-1, and County were in dreamland. In the 89th minute, Rangers reduced the deficit by 1. Following a VAR check, they were awarded a penalty, which James Tavernier scored, but it was too little, too late. This result, coupled with Celtic's 3-0 win over St Mirren on Saturday, with Rio Hatate, Kyogo and Adam Ida scoring, means Brendan Rodgers' side are in the driving seat in the title run-in. The champions hold a 4-point advantage at the summit. Rangers can reduce the deficit to 1 point if they win their game in hand against Dundee on Wednesday night.
It can make still a lot of shifts. We need to focus on ourselves and to go every time hard to get the 3 points, and it starts on Wednesday. I want to see a different performance on Wednesday than what I saw today. And it's now about showing their mentality, and tomorrow to step into the building with a lot of power and belief to take the 3 points on Wednesday.
Well, the SPFL has announced Rangers' twice postponed match against Dundee will be moved to St Johnstone's McDermott Park with fans in attendance if Dens Park fails a pitch inspection tomorrow. Meanwhile, the post-split fixtures in the Premiership won't be announced until after this game. That's despite the top and bottom half of the league being established at the weekend. Well, Hearts remain on course to secure third spot after coming back from 2-0 down to defeat Livingston 4-2 at Tynecastle. Kilmarnock further consolidated fourth place following their 2-0 victory over St Johnstone, and Motherwell and Hibernian missed out on a place in the top half of the table after drawing 1-1 at Fir Park. Rugby, and after Glasgow Warriors were eliminated from the European Champions Cup, coach Peter Murchie says the players are fired up and determined to create good memories in the United Rugby Championship. The Warriors, who are second in the URC, face Sharks at Scotstoun on Friday night. It's their penultimate game at home before the playoffs. The top 8 teams compete in the playoffs in June.
Obviously, that disappointment is gonna fire you up. You don't want that to happen to you again. So there's lessons we can take from the game to make sure we move our game forward. Obviously we're in a good position in the URC, so it's down to us to make sure that we create good memories towards the end of the season.
Big game for the Warriors on Friday. And some tennis news before I go, and it's better news for Andy Murray. He won't require surgery on the ankle injury he sustained at the Miami Open last month. No date, though, has been put on his return to competitive action. That, folks, is all your sport tonight. See you tomorrow.
All right, thanks very much, Rahman. Well, it's like the weather just can't make up its mind. Hopefully Sean can fill us in.
A dry start to the day will become increasingly splashy. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
A very good evening to you. Another week with low pressure. And you know what that means because we've had it for several weeks now. Showers, longer spells of rain. When's this going to stop? Low pressure around, giving us a showery weather and also a cool airflow at times, pulling in a northerly airflow. But look at that, a sight to behold. High pressure heading our way for the weekend, which does mean, fingers crossed, through the weekend into the early part of next week, things may be a little bit quieter and more settled and drier as well. Although it doesn't look as if it's going to last too long. We'll have a look at that as we go through the next couple of days. But at least as we go into a northerly over the next few days, the bulk of the showers to the north of us. So tonight it should be a little bit quieter than last night. I got woken up, I'm sure a few of you did as well, by those torrential downpours we had last night and the hailstones as well. So a quieter night to come as those showers ease away. A chilly night as well, quite chilly over the next few nights. Now tomorrow morning it's a dry, sunny start to the day and expect around the likes of Glasgow, Paisley, Motherwell, Cumbernauld, southwards. We hang on to drier weather until later on the day. We will see showers coming into the Highlands, also Argyll and Bute, and then those showers push into southern parts during tomorrow evening. On Wednesday, because we stay in that northerly airflow, it does look as if the bulk of the showers will stay across northern and more eastern parts. A lot of dry and bright weather here across western parts. Temperatures still on that cool side, a lot milder on Thursday, but also turning a lot wetter. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
And that is all we have time for this evening.
I'll be back with Scotland tonight at 10:40. From all of us, good night.
Good night.